7 months ago, I decided to go on a journey to complete all of the FromSoft soulsborn games with all achievements, many of which would be for the first time, and then I will cover them on this channel. We have done that chronologically, and we are currently at Sekiro. The end is nigh, and the Elden Ring expansion is nigh too. So today we are gonna be talking about Sekiro, a game that's completely taken over my life, that I absolutely love and has given me a completely new way to play these games. Back in 2018, when I originally saw the trailer for Sekiro for the very first time, I was really excited. It had a lot of the things I really liked. It had things like cool samurai fighting, really cinematic gameplay. It looked beautiful. Now, when the game then came out in 2019, I saw all of the coverage about it and talk about how hard this game was and how this was not the game to start out with in this series of games. At the time, I'd only played Dark Souls 3, which I only by pure luck and getting carried got through, so I stayed clear of Sekiro. I never bought it, I never played it, and I remained far away from it. That is until today, where against all better judgment, I decided to go down and play Sekiro. And I am amazed and happy to say that Sekiro very quickly took over my life. I did some math before starting my run. To get the platinum, I would need at least 4 playthroughs. I need to get all of the 4 endings, thereby the 4 playthroughs. I need to beat at least all of the optional bosses once, and most of the main ones 3 to 4 times. That meant that I had to beat at the very least about 95, 98-ish bosses. Now, not realizing that Lady Butterfly was technically an optional boss, I ended up doing her on 3 of my 4 playthroughs. Now, that means that I have beaten about 101 bosses in my 4 playthroughs. Now, the story of Sekiro is somewhat straightforward in comparison to the other FromSoft games. The main differences between them is that Sekiro actually does straight up tell you what it's about. It is about Wolf trying to help Kuro, the guy he is, essentially have this order to protect and obey his orders. He is your leader, you are following and protecting him. It is the immortal heir and it's your duty to keep him safe. So after you fail that mission, you're down. That is until a certain lady gives you a letter letting you know, hey, he's still alive, come and get him. So you go over there, you get him, he gives you a sword, and that is basically the start of the game as far as I understand. Now, the goals pose sort of changes throughout the game. First, you want to get Kuro back, then you want to help him sever his ties to immortality. It is at first believed the only way to do this is through killing him. However, through some of the alternative endings, you'll see there are different outcomes, such as allowing him to be absorbed, and the last one I'm gonna leave up to you to find. Now, that being said, it might be more outright cinematic in the way story is told and so on. That doesn't mean that there isn't deep lore in Sekiro. There are characters you can read into, things you can drag out of it, and of course themes such as the greed of humanity sort of taking over, and how this drive to be immortal can corrupt even the most moral man, such as your foster father, the person that took you in, who, depending on your ending, you might have to fight a couple of times to sort of, get and help Kuro. And that's sort of the entire idea of Sekiro, is how this immortality power can drive every man to do bad things, to sort of attack his own and attempt to take over the castle, also he can rule and be powerful. It's a story about how power corrupts good people, and for that I very much do have to say it does it so well. And there are multiple characters you can read into, and there are a lot of super cool things. A lot of the story is also just in the way everything looks, in the giant carp in the Fountainhead Palace. There are so many cool things you can drive from this game. However, my favorite element is definitely the sort of entire speeches about immortality and how it corrupts men, and how we cannot be allowed to be immortal because this will corrupt the minds of people. That being said, if you've heard anything about Sekiro, it's likely not about its story or how cool everything looks. It is probably closer to something along the lines of this game is really hard. And the reason why the game is really really hard even for persistent soulsborn players, people who have been playing these games for years at the time, or people who come to it from Elden Ring, is because this game requires you to parry, whereas every other one of these games is a dodging simulator. The difference is that dodging often is way more forgiving. It gives you a bit of space to get away from an enemy, and you have iframes. When you're parrying, that's not really the case. You have to be precise, you have to hit the right timing, and you have to hit the right rhythm, which of course changes to every fight. And that's one of the reasons why Sekiro also can manage something which so many games fail at. Because you see, Sekiro uses cinematics in its story. However, Sekiro also becomes a cinematic masterpiece in its combat. If you've ever watched one of the kung fu movies, the old martial art movies, and you look at it and you go, that's visceral, that looks almost like a dance, that's so cool. That is what Sekiro's combat feels like once you have learned it a little bit. Once you get your parries and your Miriki counters and so on, it becomes a dance. It becomes cool. It all of a sudden becomes a game where instead of being like, oh damn, I need to dodge this, you run at a boss and you just start blocking all of their attacks just to have the coolest finisher animation in the world. And that is rare to say. Now, not all bosses are like that, of course. There are also your more traditional Dark Souls bosses, namely Guardian Ape and Demon of Hatred. Luckily, Demon of Hatred isn't a mandatory boss. I've killed him once for the plat. However, in the Guardian Ape fight, you have to dodge more than you have to parry. Generally speaking, there are attacks that are worth parrying, but the thing that you'll hear a lot is that it's a dodging fight. I will say, I played my first Guardian Ape fight very safely. I ran away from him for like 15 minutes before I finally got the kill. I'd only hit him when he was doing his slide down attack, then I jump over and not hit him once, and that would be the entire fight. Now, that eventually did get faster, and there are ways to speed them up. It's just not how I see most people play them when they are more on the casual level. Now, that being said, that is far from every fight. Most of the bosses in this game leans perfectly into this combat system, chiefly among which the boss that you have likely heard the most about, Sword Saint Ishin, a four-faced behemoth of a fight, also does this really well. It's a cinematic masterpiece of a fight, probably one of my favorite fights from any game ever. The way this fight is done is just so cinematical. He has some fairly long charge up attacks, Sword Saint, but that being said, he hits like a fucking truck, and once the charge is done, he flings them at you. It's a moment where you enter the fromsoft sin zone, as I call it, and stay where you sort of don't think about what you do, you just react, you block, you do all of these things, and it feels fluid, it feels actiony, and no game does it better than Sekiro does. And that's because these games, while generally really good, they tend to again focus on something like dodging, where you can jump directly through attacks and so on. And I'm not saying that Sekiro is more realistic or anything like that, it's still a fantasy game. But that being said, Sekiro doesn't allow you to have that safety net of just going through the attack, of the iframe. You have to stand in there, you have to block it. Of course there are strategies around that in most fights, but it is so satisfying to see. Now, there are also shinobi tools and fighting arts to help you, shape up the playstyle a little, spice it up, and chiefly among which there's one, and that's one of the two I want to talk about. For me, the chief shinobi tool was the Sparking Axe. Sparking Axe is something that you can unlock, I'd say fairly early on in the game actually. It's not something that takes forever to get. It is your axe upgraded to where it explodes. Now, I like the base axe a lot. Like a lot. However, the Sparking Axe became my go-to after my first playthrough, just because of the amount of bosses who seemingly are allergic to it. That thing does posture damage like nothing else, and it can get you out of some sticky situations, because you get lifted up doing one of the attacks, and that can actually outright avoid certain attacks. It is fairly cool, and there is also the Shinobi Firecracker, which can blind a lot of enemies a couple of times and gives you some breathing room. Those are sort of the two I tended to use a lot, like they were my mainstay things, along with Ichimonji Dub. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times posture. Posture is a mechanic that is visible in Sekiro. However, most of the games seemingly have it. Elden Ring chief among which. This is the point in an Elden Ring fight like Millennia where you attack her and she bows over and you get a free stab at her for a lot of damage. Sekiro has that mechanic slammed up to 1000. Now, in Sekiro, your posture is basically everything, and it's how you'll defeat 90% of bosses. It's represented by a giant orange bar that will tend to just always go down. However, if you keep up aggression and you don't hesitate to just keep on hitting, parrying, and countering, you'll build up posture. When the bar is filled, you'll get a chance to remove an entire health bar, and or, if there's only one health bar left, outright kill a boss. This can be the source of some insane comebacks, but it can also be the outright source of frustration if you can't get it to build up. If you cannot get it to build up, my tip for you would be just hit him a couple of times and run away. Like, if you're struggling, just remember that the posture bar at one point or another will stop depleting at the same rate, because posture is, like I said, how you'll defeat 90% of bosses. Now, some bosses that range more true than others. As an example, I have gotten exactly 2 posture kills on Guardian Ape and 0 on Demon of Hatred. I did health kills on both of them, which is to say I depleted the health bar, not the posture bar, and that is sort of rare to see in this game because you tend to just do posture instead, because it just happens faster passively while playing. And it is one of outright the best mechanics I've ever seen, because posture allows, like I said, for some insane comebacks. And not just does it allow for some insane comebacks, but it also allows for you to feel like there's always a fighting chance. Like, yeah, you can rest yourself, which is nice, but the posture allows you to rest yourself again. And if you get about halfway through the game, you get a third charge, so you can rest yourself one more time. This is an incredible mechanic for both just the way you play the game, but even more so just for how good the combat feels, because it never feels like you have to give a fight up, while you're like, okay, I simply don't have enough health, I don't have enough this, I don't have enough that, I have to just stop. You can always push through a fight in Sekiro, and that is fucking awesome. There's not the point in it where it's like, okay, I have 0 heals left, I'm done. It's no, I am almost there with that posture bar. If I just hit 10 more hits, I'll be in. If I just block 1 more attack, right? Like, it always feels like there is something going on there, and I think that's amazing. It does it all while being as cinematic as it is. It's honestly a masterpiece. One thing is to make a combat system that feels really good in single target fights. That has all of the Souls games. All of the Souls games feels good in a single combat scenario. However, for group combat, that's a little bit rarer. In Sekiro's case, they have absolutely managed that. It feels, like I said, like a cinematic when you're fighting in groups. It feels like one of those group fights in a like Hollywood kongfu movie, where you're flinging people around, you get a death blow on one of them, so you stab him with your sword, you get a little bit of health back, you invigorate yourself a little bit, so you go for the next one and the next one, and so on until they're all dead. It feels really good once you get into it, and that is something that's kind of rare. As an example, Dark Souls 2 had a combat system I actually quite enjoyed, despite ADP. It felt good in general in single target combat, but in most of the areas, you were up in a gang fight, and at that point, the combat system became tedious and kind of bad. And in Sekiro, you can learn a lot of things through just playing the game. Not just that, but you also earn XP, which can be used to unlock the combat arts, but it can also be used to unlock upgrades that can be passive things, such as you gain a little bit of heal from death blows, or you heal more on your heal items, and so on. There are a lot of small cool things you can unlock in Sekiro, which is fucking awesome. Now, some upgrades will have to be found, primarily among which the Shinobi tools. You don't just get them and they aren't just for sale. You will have to find a bunch of small items to then go back and craft your tools so you can use them later on. This is included in both boss kills. Sometimes you get them from there, sometimes you just find them. They're sort of scattered all around the place, and that it's great. It's a fun little scavenger hunt. It is a game that encourages exploration despite not having any gear per se to find, just because of the Shinobi tools, because you have all of the upgrade materials, and the slightly, in my opinion, cooler thing is that you can find combat arts just laying around the place, chief among which the Tomo art, which can allow you to reflect lightning attacks, which is so useful in both the Sword Saint Ishin fight and the Genichiro fight, 2 of my favorites in the game. That allows you to just deflect their lightning attacks by jumping, then blocking, and then hitting back once it's just hit you, so you can reflect all of the lightning back to them, building up their posture by even quicker, and so on. There's also different small quests you can go on like around all of these games, and they're all fairly good, fairly interesting. I will say, I feel like the entire system kinda doesn't fall flat because exploration is always fun in these games, and you always need more consumable items and so on. However, at a certain point you sort of reach a place where you already have all the upgrades, you already have all of the skills, and it becomes a case of why do I really bother with running around in areas I don't have to be? And that might just be me, but that was at least how I ended up playing, so I skipped a lot of the areas, which is a bit unfortunate. I think a game like Dark Souls 3 did a really good job of that by just hiding new items on New Game Plus and like different rings and stuff, and Dark Souls 2 did that too. And I think that's a pretty good way to get around that. Really cool system otherwise though, and the world, especially for the first time, is fucking cool, and it's insanely detailed with a lot of optional fights such as the Ring of Water or any of these other fighters like two-chained ogre fights. There are actually kind of a lot of unique fights as well you can just find around the place. The headless are also there, are also underwater fights and diving. There's of course also your grappling hook, which allows for an entirely different way of exploring the game map, and it is a fun little addition. However, I could sort of also see the game working without it if they just put all the platforms a lot closer. I think it's a really cool addition just because of how it's being used everywhere, both in combat and outside of combat, because sometimes in combat you can grapple onto your enemies to get closer to them or to avoid attacks and so on, chiefly among which Gyriaba and as a mechanic for their fights. Now, when it comes to aesthetics, Sekiro is beautiful in a lot of ways. It's also overall less grotesque than the Dark Souls games and Bloodborne, and it is in the sense that the enemies are more so grounded in reality. It is dupe bros fighting other dupe bros to become the bigger dupe bro. Now, that is not all enemies, of course. There is the Headless Ape, there is the Demon of Hatred, which are more grotesque in nature than, you know, Sword Saint Ishin or Genichiro, which are all just humans with some abilities, right? There are some of that classic FromSoft stuff. However, I find mostly that the enemies are less grotesque than in the other games, which, while I like the grotesque enemy, was refreshing to see something that wasn't the Gaping Dragon or insert any Bloodborne creature here, because let's be real, Bloodborne, while being an amazing, fantastic game, and I love the design, let's be real, they are kind of grotesque. And the thing is, Sekiro doesn't have any of that. Sekiro doesn't have that grotesque design, which is a huge W for, well, Sekiro, because it manages to stand out sort of just because of that. And while yes, there is the one thing of like the character design not being grotesque, the world design isn't either. Quite on the contrary, I'd say Sekiro is probably the prettiest game I've ever played. Straight up, some of the areas were outright jaw-dropping. I actually took time off while I was playing just to look at Fountainhead Palace, just to stand there in awe of how beautiful that area was. And I can say that about multiple places in Sekiro. It is such a pretty game. It's just outright beautiful. And even the transition scenes, in my opinion, were really cool and well designed. Just the one with the big straw man that like picks you up and yeets you on a mountain. I think it's fucking cool. I really like that. I really like that. And that's not to say there aren't grotesque elements in it. You have the Demon of Hatred, which is a little bit over there, and the Headless Ape, which is even more over there. You also have the cutscene in the Sword Saint Ishin fight, where Ishin crawls out of Genichiro, which is just, what the fuck? It's so weird. And it's still out there, and it has that classic FromSoft sort of feel. And in this game, while you don't have all of the other online co-op features, you do have revenants you can look at, which are essentially these remnants of other players where you can see how they died and stuff like that. Just like the bloodstains in the other games. Out there, and it has that classic FromSoft sort of feel. And in this game, while you don't have all of the other online co-op features, you do have revenants you can look at, which are essentially these remnants of other players where you can see how they died and stuff like that. Just like the bloodstains in the other games. One entirely different thing Sekiro also does really well is the repeat playthroughs just feeling really good to play. You see, usually with these games, you can struggle through the first playthrough and struggle through the next one and so on. Like, it's not necessarily gonna get a lot easier because, you know, some of the health gets boosted and so on. In Sekiro though, the next couple of playthroughs you feel like a powerhouse because you have gotten good. For most of the game's monsters and most of the bosses, you'll completely just wreck them. You will go head to head with even Guardian Ape after your first playthrough and completely annihilate it, and you will feel good about it because you have gotten good officially. Because these bosses also get the health increase, but because this game is like a set more of a rhythm game, you can remember a lot of the combos and just build a posture power so fast. It's so nice. It's such a cool little thing because it makes the game really interesting. The repeat playthroughs were some of the most fun I've had. Because you see, in Sekiro I didn't always have a lot of fun. During the first part of the game, I'd say until after I beat Genichiro, the game just hadn't fully clicked for me yet. The lady butterfly fight did sorta help it, but it was only at Genichiro I really realized how this game was supposed to be played and what I was supposed to do. And that was also when I started really having fun with it. It was when I started just completely being good. I even first tried some bosses at that point. Albeit some optional bosses, but still, let me take my W here. And after that fight, after the Genichiro fight, that's also when I started to learn about Miracle Count and all of these things, despite the fact that for a bit I didn't use it. As an example, I did Armor Warrior without Miracle Counter, a fight that Miracle Counter basically just completely invalidates. If you have Miracle Counter, you have won that fight already. And I did that without it the first time because I just wasn't confident enough in it. However, after having played a little bit with Miracle Counter, it's fairly forgiving. It's a great little way to play the game as well. And it's fucking huge in some of the boss fights. It builds up a lot of posture for you just completely deflecting enemies. Now to sort of wrap up this video, I just want to mention that if you put Sekiro down before Genichiro especially, I feel like it's worth giving a try again. Honestly, it is in general. And if you haven't played Sekiro, maybe you're like me who were intimidated by the game, especially because it is one of those games where you hear, this game is really hard. You know, if you're gonna play this, you'll have to get good. Don't worry too much about it. It's a really fun game that after a certain point it'll click for you, and once it's clicked, that's when the game just completely wins you over in a way that I haven't seen in a while. It is such a fantastic experience to play Sekiro. It's a game that honestly kind of transcends the entire idea of being a game and just manages to be a cinematic masterpiece that you get to control. It's a game that is completely amazing in every single aspect of it. I can't really say anything bad about Sekiro. The only bad thing I can say about Sekiro is that there isn't more, because so far FromSoft hasn't mentioned anything about Sekiro. There isn't DLC, there isn't any sequel. There is a couple of free updates you can go and play, primarily in the Gauntlet, which I didn't get to complete because they skill checked me hard, and I was simply just not good enough to go through all of the gauntlets, which are essentially just a bush rush mode, which is also a really cool feature for Sekiro to have. I think Sekiro should get a sequel. I think it should have gotten DLC, and I think it's an actual crime that it didn't. That being said, thank you so much for watching the video. You decided to spend your time with me, and I really do appreciate that a whole lot. If you liked the video, you leave a like, and comment, and subscribe. And otherwise, just have a wonderful evening. I hope you enjoy your time, and I'll see you all later.